The next morning at Wyatt's fort was pure suffering. Sunlight cut through the windows like knives. Groans echoed through the main hall as the frontier line's finest tried to remember how to be human again. Brock lay face down on one of the long tables, one massive arm dangling over the edge like a dead snake. Kane had curled himself into a tight ball in the corner, his tail wrapped completely around his body, letting out the occasional pathetic whimper. Neera sat with her head buried in her hands, her normally perfect blonde braids looking like they'd survived a tornado. Raven looked the worst of them all. She was slumped against the wall like someone had poured her there. One hand pressed firmly against her forehead, as if trying to keep her skull from splitting open. And then there was Rhett. He strolled into the room bright-eyed and disgustingly cheerful, whistling a cheerful tune while carrying a tray of water and fresh bread. "Morning, champions," he announced with a big grin. Brock lifted his head just enough to glare at him with pure hatred. "I hate you." Rhett's grin only widened. "You're welcome." From his corner, Kane's weak voice floated out. "How are you not dead?" Rhett just winked. "Trade secret." Raven let out a low, dangerous growl in her native tongue, something that definitely sounded like a death threat. After everyone had forced down some water and a little bread, Wyatt called them all together for a short meeting. "The second route is nearly complete," he said, his deep voice steady as always. "Wyatt's Fort and Shadowgate Fort are already running. We still need to finish the major repairs on Tenshu Fort. That will be our focus next week." He glanced over at Raven, who was still wincing at the sound of his voice. "But today," Wyatt continued, "we have a new rider who needs to make her first official run." Rhett's eyes lit up instantly. "I'll take her," he said, that manic grin spreading across his face. "First route, all the way to Pony Fort and back. Let her get a real feel for it." Wyatt studied them both for a moment, then gave a single nod. "Good. The rest of you, recover. We head back to Central City in an hour." Later that day, Rhett led Raven into the supply room at the Frontier Line stables in Central City. "Time to get you properly geared," he said, pulling items off the shelves. He handed her a strong leather belt with a holster, a pair of durable riding gloves, and a solid pair of brown riding boots that actually fit her. Raven put each piece on in silence. When she finished adjusting the belt and gloves, she looked down at herself. The dark leather armor was still there, but combined with the new gear and the bright blue ribbon on her arm, she looked different. She looked like she belonged. Rhett gave her an approving nod. "Looking like a real rider now." Raven mounted her horse, the sleek black mare named Whisper, and gathered the reins. She looked over at Rhett, green eyes burning with wild excitement. "Stop talking," she said, a dangerous little smirk on her lips. "Let's ride." The two of them exploded out of Central City like twin bolts of lightning, blue ribbons whipping violently in the wind behind them. For the first few hours, Raven rode hard, pushing Whisper to match Rhett's pace. Her body was tense, her grip tight on the reins. This wasn't just a ride, it was a test. Every stride of the horse beneath her felt like a rebellion against everything she had ever known. Rhett kept glancing over at her, clearly studying her riding style. After a while, he slowed his horse slightly and called out, "You don't have to race me the whole way, you know." Raven shot him a sharp look, but slowly eased her pace. They settled into a steady, ground-eating canter. As the hours passed, the landscape changed around them. Golden grasslands gave way to rolling hills, then scattered groves of trees. They stopped once at a small relay station to water the horses and stretch their legs. Raven barely spoke, but her green eyes were constantly moving, taking in everything. That night, they made camp in a small grove just off the main road. As they sat by the fire eating dried meat and hardtack, Raven was unusually quiet. She kept touching the blue ribbon on her arm, almost like she was making sure it was still real. Rhett watched her for a while before speaking. "First day as a real rider," he said softly. "How's it feel?" Raven stared into the flames for a long moment. "I've ridden fast before," she said quietly, "but never like this. Never without someone telling me where to go or why." She looked up at him, her green eyes reflecting the firelight. "I feel like I could ride forever." Rhett's usual manic grin softened into something gentler. "Good," he said, "because tomorrow we push even harder." The next morning they continued west. The land opened up into wide, beautiful prairie. They followed a winding river for several miles, golden sunlight dancing across the water's surface. At one point, they crossed an old stone bridge, its weathered arches covered in moss and ivy. Raven slowed whispered just to take in the view, something Rhett noticed but didn't comment on. In the mid-afternoon, trouble found them. A low, menacing growl echoed from the tree line to their left. 5 large, mangy wolves emerged from the underbrush, eyes locked on the horses, lips curled back in hunger. Rhett's hand flew to his revolver in a flash. Before he could even clear leather, Raven moved like lightning. In one smooth, fluid motion, she unslung the bow from her back, nocked an arrow, and fired. The lead wolf dropped instantly. Before the rest of the pack could react, she had already nocked and released a second arrow. Another wolf went down with a yelp. The remaining 3 wolves hesitated, then turned tail and vanished back into the trees. Rhett sat frozen in his saddle, revolver half drawn, staring at her in open disbelief. "Damn," he finally breathed, letting out a low whistle. That was fast. Raven calmly slung her bow back over her shoulder, her expression cool and composed. "I prefer the bow," she said simply. "It's quiet, clean." She glanced over at him, a spark of wild pride in her green eyes. "Besides, guns are loud. They attract attention. I don't like being noticed." Rhett laughed, shaking his head in amazement. "You're something else, wild one." They arrived at Pony Fort late that afternoon. After handing off the mail and resting for the night, they began their return journey the next morning. This time, the ride felt different. Raven rode with a new confidence, more relaxed in the saddle, her eyes no longer constantly scanning for threats, but instead drinking in the beauty of the land she was now free to ride. By the time they rode back through the gates of Central City the following evening, something fundamental had changed in Raven. She no longer looked like a raider who had stolen a blue ribbon. She looked like she belonged on that road. 2 days after returning from Pony Fort, the mood in the Frontier Line office had completely shifted. The focus was no longer on new riders. It was on finishing the second route. Wyatt stood in front of the large map pinned to the wall, marking the final stretch that still needed work. "Tenshu Fort is the last major piece," he said, his deep voice commanding attention. "Once that fort is fully operational, both routes will be officially complete. We're all going." He looked at each of them in turn. "Rhett, Brock, Kane, Nira, Raven. We leave in 3 days. This is no longer just about riding. It's about building." Raven stood near the back of the room, arms crossed. She gave a single, firm nod. 2 months later, the entire building crew arrived at Tenshu Fort. The final stronghold on the western route was breathtaking. Built on a strategic hill overlooking the plains, it combined sturdy Michigan military design with elegant curved wooden roofs. It was half finished, and the team immediately got to work. For 10 long, grueling days, Tenshu Fort became the center of their world. The work was hard, dirty, and relentless. From the moment the sun crested the hills until it dipped below them again, the sound of hammers, saws, and shouted commands filled the air. Brock was in his element. The big man spent most of his days shirtless, sweat pouring down his massive frame as he single-handedly lifted beams that should have required 4 men. Every time he hoisted another heavy timber into place, he let out a booming laugh that echoed across the fort. Kane moved between stations like a shadow, clipboard in hand. his cat ears constantly twitching as he tracked supplies, coordinated work crews, and made sure every measurement was perfect. He was the only one who seemed to know exactly how many nails they had left and which sections needed reinforcement first. Neera had taken charge of the interior. She moved with her usual graceful precision, directing where supplies should be stored, organizing the sleeping quarters, and making sure the fort would be not just functional, but livable. Rhett, as always, was chaos in human form. He somehow managed to be useful while never staying in one place for too long. One minute, he was hammering roof tiles. The next, he was cracking jokes that had the entire work crew laughing. And occasionally, he'd disappear only to return with cold water for everyone. And then there was Raven. She surprised them all. The former raider threw herself into the work with a kind of fierce intensity that caught even Wyatt off guard. She carried heavy loads of timber up scaffolding without complaint. She learned how to properly set support beams. She spent hours on the walls, helping reinforce the defensive positions with focused determination. Her once pristine blue ribbon was now stained with sweat, dirt, sawdust, and varnish, but she wore it like a badge of honor. One evening, after a particularly long day, the entire team gathered on the newly completed outer wall. They sat in a line along the edge, legs dangling over the side, watching the sun set over the rolling hills. The mood was tired but deeply satisfied. Brock took a long drink from his canteen and broke the silence first. "Hard to believe we're almost done," he said, his deep voice rumbling. "Wyatt's Fort, Shadowgate Fort, Tenshu Fort, plus all the relay stations in between. We actually built something real out here." Neera smiled softly, the golden light catching her blonde hair beautifully. "2 complete routes," she said, "from Eastmere all the way to Nishigane. A full network." Rhett leaned back on his hands, that signature wild grin on his face. "We're not just a courier company anymore," he said. "We're building the backbone of the frontier." All eyes eventually turned toward Raven. She had been quiet for a long time, staring out at the vast landscape. Her silver-white hair moved gently in the evening breeze. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "I used to watch you from the shadows," she said, her voice low but clear. "I thought you were all insane, racing through dangerous lands with nothing but a piece of blue cloth on your arm, smiling like fools." She looked down at her own ribbon, now filthy from days of hard labor. "I thought freedom was something you took from others by force. That's how I was raised. That's how my clan survived." She lifted her head, green eyes reflecting the dying light of the sunset. "But now I understand. You weren't just delivering messages. You were building something. 1 mile at a time, 1 fort at a time, 1 rider at a time." The group fell into a comfortable silence, letting her words settle over them. Wyatt eventually stood up, looking at each of them with quiet pride in his eyes. "Tomorrow we finish the final touches," he said. "Once that banner goes up, both routes will be officially whole." 2 days later. The entire team stood together in the main courtyard of Tenshu Fort as the final banner was raised. A long, vibrant blue ribbon flag unfurled in the wind above the fort, fluttering proudly against the clear sky. Both routes were now officially complete. Rhett let out a loud, wild victory cry. Brock roared with laughter and clapped Kane so hard on the back that the catboy nearly stumbled forward. Neera smiled warmly while Wyatt allowed himself one of his rare, genuine smiles. Raven stood slightly apart from the others, staring up at the blue banner with an unreadable expression. She had started as their enemy. Now she had helped build the very thing she once tried to destroy. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly part of something bigger than herself or her clan. A week after the banner was raised over Tenshu Fort, the team had returned to Central City. Early the next morning, the Frontier Line office was unusually tense. Kane stood by the assignment board, ears twitching with clear frustration. Wyatt was reading a message that had just been delivered by an emergency rider. The rest of the team gathered around, sensing something was wrong. "Marcus broke his leg at Eagle Fort," Wyatt said, lowering the paper. "He was supposed to run the full route to Eastmere today. We're short a rider." The room went quiet. It was a long, demanding run. 6 days round trip, switching horses along the way and resting at Pony Fort and Eagle Fort. Not something you gave to just anyone. Before anyone could speak, a calm, steady voice cut through the silence. "I'll take it." Every head turned toward Raven. She stood near the back of the room, arms crossed, green eyes steady and determined. The blue ribbon on her arm stood out brightly against her dark gear. Wyatt studied her carefully. "It's the full route," he said. "Central City to Eastmere and back. 6 days. You just finished helping us build Ten Shoe Fort. You're still recovering." "I'm fine," Raven replied without hesitation. "I want the road." Rhett's manic grin slowly spread across his face. He looked genuinely proud. Wyatt held her gaze for a long moment, then gave a single nod. "Be ready at first light tomorrow. You'll take Whisper. Rest at Pony Fort and Eagle Fort both ways. No heroics. Just ride smart." Raven gave a sharp nod, her expression focused. The next morning, long before the sun had risen, Raven stood beside Whisper in the stable, fully geared and ready. The entire team had come to see her off, even at this early hour. Rhett handed her the sealed mail satchel. "Safe ride, wild one," he said with his manic grin. Raven mounted Whisper in one smooth motion. She looked down at her new family, the people who had given her a chance at real freedom. Without saying a word, she turned Whisper toward the eastern gate and kicked her into a gallop. Her first true solo run had begun. The eastern gate of Central City had barely faded behind her when Raven felt it. That feeling. The moment the city walls disappeared and the wide-open prairie stretched out before her, something deep in her chest unclenched. For the first time since putting on the blue ribbon, she was completely alone on the road. No Rhett watching her, no team waiting for her, no one to perform for. Just her, Whisper, and 6 days of open sky. She rode at a steady, ground-eating pace, careful not to push her mare too hard on the first leg. The morning sun warmed her back as the grasslands rolled by in gentle waves. After a couple of hours, she began to notice the wildlife around her. A small herd of pronghorn watched her from a distance, their white rumps flashing as they bounded away. Later, she spotted a lone coyote trotting parallel to the road for a while before vanishing into the tall grass. Hawks circled high above, riding the thermals. At the first way station, little more than a sturdy cabin with a corral and fresh water, Raven stopped to rest and water Whisper. The station keeper, an older man named Silas, gave her a respectful nod when he saw the blue ribbon on her arm. "New rider?" he asked. "First solo run," Raven replied. Silas gave her a knowing smile. "You'll feel different when you come back this way in 6 days. The road changes you." She didn't respond, but his words stayed with her as she mounted a fresh horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Ranger, and continued east. The second leg of the day took her across a wide, beautiful stretch of prairie. Around midday, she crossed an old wooden bridge spanning a shallow river. The water sparkled beneath her as Ranger's hooves thudded across the planks. On the far side, she slowed the horse to a walk for a few minutes, taking in the view. That was when she saw them. A small family of mule deer grazed peacefully in the tall grass, not far from the riverbank. A doe lifted her head and stared directly at Raven for several long seconds before lowering her head again to eat. Raven sat motionless in the saddle, simply watching them. There was a strange kind of peace in the moment. By late afternoon, the familiar wooden shape of Pony Fort appeared on the horizon. Raven rode through the gates as the sun began to dip toward the western hills. Her body was tired, but her spirit felt more alive than it had in years. She dismounted smoothly and handed Ranger's reins to a stable hand. As she unstrapped the mail satchel from the saddle, she caught her reflection in a nearby water trough, dust-covered, tired, but standing tall. The blue ribbon on her arm was no longer just a piece of cloth. It was starting to feel like it belonged there. That night at Pony Fort, Raven slept better than she had in years. The small bunk room assigned to riders was simple, but after a full day in the saddle, the hard cot felt like a luxury. She lay on her back in the dark, one hand resting on the blue ribbon that was still tied around her arm. The sounds of the fort, horses shifting in the stables, distant voices of night guards, the occasional hoot of an owl, were strangely comforting. For the first time, she wasn't sleeping with one eye open, waiting for an attack from a rival clan. She was simply a rider resting between runs. The next morning, she was awake before dawn. After a quick breakfast and a strong cup of coffee, Raven switched to a new horse, a tough, sure-footed roan mare named Ember. She secured the fresh mail satchel and rode out of Pony Fort just as the first light of dawn painted the sky pink. The landscape began to change almost immediately. The wide open prairie slowly gave way to scattered groves of trees, which grew thicker and taller the further east she rode. By mid-morning, she had officially entered the Greenbelt Forest, a long stretch of rolling woodland that sat between Pony Fort and Eagle Fort. The air felt different here, cooler, heavier with the scent of pine and damp earth. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, creating moving patterns on the forest floor. The sound of the wind was softer, filtered through thousands of leaves. Raven found herself riding slower than usual, taking in the new environment. She had spent most of her life in the wild blackthorn wilds, but this forest felt peaceful, almost welcoming. She stopped once at a small way station nestled in a clearing. The keeper, a quiet woman with short-cropped hair, offered her fresh water and a few strips of dried venison. They barely exchanged 10 words, but the woman gave Raven a respectful nod when she saw the blue ribbon. "Safe riding, Frontier Line." As the afternoon wore on, the forest grew denser. The path wound between ancient trees, their trunks wide enough that 3 riders could have passed through side by side. At one point, Raven heard the distinct sound of running water and followed a small side trail to a crystal-clear stream. She let Ember drink while she dismounted and knelt by the water's edge. Cupping her hands, she splashed cold water on her face and neck, washing away some of the trail dust. For a moment, she simply knelt there, listening to the forest around her. A soft smile touched her lips, small, private, and genuine. This was what she had wanted. Not glory, not revenge, just this, the freedom to ride, the quiet of the road, the feeling of being exactly where she was meant to be. She straightened the saddle, adjusted the blue ribbon on her arm, mounted and urged Ember into a smooth canter. The second leg of her first solo run was nearly complete. The Greenbelt Forest had begun to thin, ancient trunks giving way to scattered groves and open stretches of golden grass. Raven rode with quiet confidence, Ember's steady hoofbeats the only rhythm in the late afternoon hush. The sky, however, had other plans. It had been darkening for the last hour, purple-black clouds boiling up from the west like an angry tide. The air grew thick, heavy with the metallic scent of coming rain. Wind whipped through the remaining trees, tugging at Raven's silver-white hair and snapping the blue ribbon on her arm like a battle flag. She kept Ember at a ground-eating canter, eyes scanning the horizon. Something about this storm felt alive, deliberate. A deafening crack split the world, not ordinary thunder, deeper, older. Raven hauled Ember to a sliding stop. The mare danced nervously beneath her as lightning forked across the sky in blinding white veins. Then the clouds parted. Not drifted, parted. A single colossal wing, wider than a mountain range, sliced through the gap. Feathers the color of storm clouds and polished obsidian shimmered with inner lightning. Another wing followed, beating once. The sound that rolled outward wasn't thunder. It was the heartbeat of the sky itself. High above, silhouetted against the fractured heavens, the thunderbird wheeled. Its body was eagle and storm made flesh, proud head crowned with jagged horns of crackling lightning, eyes burning like twin forge fires. In its massive talons it clutched something dark and writhing, a shadow that twisted like a serpent from the old clan legends. For one impossible heartbeat, the Great Spirit looked down, its gaze locked with Raven's. Time slowed. The wind died. Even Ember stood frozen in awe, muscles locked beneath Raven like stone. Raven's breath caught hard in her throat. Her heart slammed against her ribs so violently she felt it in her teeth. A fierce electric heat surged down her left arm where the blue ribbon was tied. The fabric suddenly felt alive, burning, pulsing in time with the thunderbird's wing beats. Her fingers twitched around the reins, knuckles bone white. A wild tremor raced through her body, not fear but raw, untamed recognition. Her green eyes widened. Tears welled unbidden at the corners of her eyes and mixed with the first heavy drops of rain. A fierce, savage smile began pulling at her lips, half awe, half defiance, as the storm spirit stared straight into her soul. The thunderbird opened its beak. A bolt of pure white lightning lanced downward, not striking her, but slamming into the ground barely 100 yards ahead. The impact carved a perfect glowing blue line along the earth for a shimmering moment before fading, illuminating an old half-buried trail marker she hadn't noticed. The lightning trail pointed straight toward Eagle Fort like a guiding arrow. Then, with one final earth-shaking wing beat that sent a visible ripple across the prairie grass, the thunderbird folded its wings and vanished back into the roiling clouds. The gap sealed. Rain began to fall, hard, clean, life-giving rain instead of the destructive deluge she had feared. Raven sat motionless in the saddle, soaked to the bone, chest heaving. Her heart still thundered. The ribbon on her arm still felt warm against her skin for several long seconds before it faded, leaving only the familiar strip of blue cloth, now dark with rainwater. She slowly lifted a trembling hand and pressed it over the ribbon, feeling the lingering heat against her palm. Her breath came out shaky, almost a laugh. Ember shifted beneath her, finally released from her trance, and let out a low, awed snort. Raven didn't speak. She didn't need to. Instead, she clicked her tongue, gently kicked Ember into a gallop, and followed the path the lightning had blessed. Silver hair streaming behind her like a banner, green eyes blazing with something new and untamed. The road ahead no longer felt like just a road. It felt like it led home. After several hours on the trail, Eagle Fort rose ahead of her on a small rocky outcrop, exactly as she had been told. A clear stream wound its way in front of the fort, crossed by a sturdy wooden bridge that led directly to the main gate. The late afternoon sun made the water sparkle as Raven rode Ember across the bridge, the mare's hooves clopping loudly against the wood. The fort itself was beautiful in its own rugged way. A solid 2-story wooden structure reinforced with stone, built to withstand both weather and trouble. A blue ribbon banner already flew from the watchtower, fluttering proudly in the breeze. After handing over the outgoing mail and stabling Ember, Raven was shown to the riders' quarters. She ate a simple but hearty meal with a few off-duty riders, listening quietly as they swapped stories. She didn't say much, but they treated her with the quiet respect given to anyone wearing the blue ribbon. When night finally fell, Raven couldn't sleep. She slipped outside and climbed up to the roof of the eastern watchtower. From there, she had a perfect view of the greenbelt forest stretching behind her and the vast grasslands beginning to open up ahead. She lay on her back, hands behind her head, staring up at the endless field of stars above. For a long time, she simply breathed. So much had changed in such a short time. Just months ago, she'd been a raider, stalking these same roads, looking for victims. Now she was lying on top of a fort wearing a blue ribbon, carrying mail for people she was starting to care about. A soft breeze moved across the rooftop. Raven spoke quietly into the night, her voice barely louder than a whisper. Is this what freedom really feels like? The stars offered no answer, but she didn't need one. She thought about Rhett's wild laugh, about Wyatt's quiet strength, about Brock's booming voice and Neera's graceful presence, even Kane's cautious but sincere words. They had given her a chance, and now, for the first time, she felt like she was finally becoming the person she was always meant to be. A small, peaceful smile formed on her lips as she closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would leave Eagle Fort behind and ride into true cowboy country. She couldn't wait. The sun was warm on her back as Raven rode east from Eagle Fort the following morning, Whisper moving at a steady, ground-eating canter. The landscape had changed dramatically. The dense greenbelt forest was behind her now. Ahead stretched wide, golden grasslands, the heart of cowboy country. This was new territory for her. The air smelled different here, drier, cleaner, with the faint scent of prairie grass and distant cattle. The sky felt bigger. The horizon stretched endlessly in every direction. Raven found herself riding slower than usual, simply taking it all in. She had spent most of her life in dark forests and rugged wilds. This open, sunlit land felt almost unreal. After a few hours, she spotted a lone rider coming toward her on the trail. An older cowboy on a dusty bay gelding leading a string of pack horses. As they passed each other, the man's eyes flicked to the bright blue ribbon on Raven's arm. His weathered face broke into a small, respectful smile. He touched the brim of his hat and gave her a single, slow nod. "Safe travels, rider," he called out. Raven blinked in surprise. She gave him a small nod back, unsure how to respond. The man didn't stop. He just kept riding, but the simple gesture stayed with her longer than she expected. They know the ribbon, she thought. They respect it. A few hours later, she crested a low hill and spotted a small wagon train moving slowly along a parallel trail. 4 heavy wagons pulled by sturdy draft horses with a handful of armed guards riding alongside. As she passed them at a distance, one of the guards raised a hand in greeting. A woman sitting on the lead wagon even smiled and waved. Raven hesitated, then raised her hand and waved back. It felt strange. Good, but strange. These people didn't know her. They didn't know she used to be a raider. They only saw the blue ribbon. And that was enough for them to offer respect. She rode on, a small, quiet smile on her face. The sun was beginning to set when Raven finally rode into Eastmere. She guided her tired horse straight to the frontier line stables near the western edge of town. After handing over the mail satchels and making sure her horse was properly cared for, she let out a long breath. 3 days. She had done it. Her body ached, her legs were stiff, and she was covered in trail dust. All she wanted to do was collapse into a bunk and sleep. But as she stood in the stable yard, something stopped her. She looked toward the lights of the town, then back at the bunkhouse. After a moment, she muttered to herself, "I'm staying here a full day anyway. Might as well see what this town is about." She washed her face at the water trough, adjusted the blue ribbon on her arm, and walked into Eastmere. The town was lively even at dusk. Music, laughter, and the smell of grilled meat drifted through the streets. Raven wandered without any real direction until she heard the loudest noise coming from a big wooden building with a painted sign that read, "The Drunken Pony." She pushed open the swinging doors and stepped inside. The saloon was packed and rowdy. A piano played in the corner while card games, laughter, and the clinking of glasses filled the air. Raven made her way through the crowd and claimed a spot at the far end of the long wooden bar. She had barely sat down when a voice spoke from behind the counter. "Well now, look what the frontier line dragged in." Raven looked up. The man behind the bar was tall, broad-shouldered, and had sharp, intelligent eyes. His sleeves were rolled up, showing corded forearms, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had seen everything this town had to offer. Zerv. He leaned on the bar with both hands, studying her with open curiosity. His gaze flicked to the blue ribbon on her arm, then back to her face. "Dark elf, blue ribbon, silver hair," he said, tilting his head. "You must be the wild one I've heard about. Raven, right?" Raven narrowed her eyes slightly, already sensing his teasing nature. "And you must be the loudmouth bartender Rhett warned me about," she shot back. Zerv let out a low chuckle, clearly amused. "Guilty," he said, grabbing a glass and sliding it in front of her, "though I prefer charming saloon keeper." He poured her a drink from a bottle of nightshade without asking. "First solo run?" he asked, leaning on the bar across from her. Raven took the glass, eyeing him carefully. "Yes." Zerv studied her for a moment, then gave her a small, surprisingly respectful nod. 6 days alone on the road. That's no small thing." His smirk returned. "Most new riders look half dead when they get here. You just look like you're ready to ride another 8. Raven took a slow sip of her drink, then met his eyes. "I liked it," she said plainly. "The quiet. The sky. Being left alone with my thoughts." Zerv raised an eyebrow, genuinely intrigued. "Careful," he said, his voice dropping a little. "The road has a way of getting under your skin. Some people never want to stop riding once they get a taste of it." He poured himself a drink and raised his glass slightly toward her. "To the new rider," he said, "and to the road that's clearly already got its hooks in you." Raven looked at him for a long moment, then clinked her glass against his. She didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth twitched, just slightly. The return journey to Central City felt different. Raven rode with a calm confidence she hadn't possessed before. The vast grasslands, the greenbelt forest, the bridge over the river. They no longer felt like strange territory. They felt like hers. She made good time, switching horses at the way stations, Eagle Fort and Pony Fort, and by the evening of day 6, the skyline of Central City finally appeared on the horizon. When she rode through the main gates of the Frontier Line stables, the entire team was waiting for her. Rhett was leaning against a post with his arms crossed, wearing that familiar manic grin. Brock stood beside him with a big smile. Nira and Kane stood a little further back, watching with quiet interest. Even Wyatt was there, arms folded, observing. Raven dismounted slowly, her legs stiff but steady. She walked up to Wyatt and handed him the completed delivery logs without a word. Wyatt took the logs and studied her for a moment. The dust on her clothes, the tired but bright look in her green eyes, and the weathered blue ribbon still tied proudly around her arm. He gave her a single, firm nod. "Welcome back, Ryder." Rhett pushed off the post and walked over, looking her up and down. "So?" he asked, eyes sparkling with curiosity. "How was your first real run, Wild One?" Raven was quiet for a moment. She looked at all of them, her new family, then down at the dirty blue ribbon on her arm. She gave a small, tired but genuine smile. "I think," she said softly, "I finally understand what this ribbon really means." She lifted her gaze to meet theirs. "I'm not just riding for the Frontier Line anymore." Raven's voice was low, but there was a quiet strength in it that hadn't been there before. "I'm riding for myself." The group fell silent for a moment. Then Rhett let out a loud, proud laugh and threw his arm around her shoulders. "Welcome to the family, Raven." And this time, she didn't shrug him off. She just smiled.
Thunderstorm is proof it still exists. Thunderbird rising through the mist. Try to remember what the elders said. Wings that shake the sky, never dead.